So welcome everyone to our webinar this evening. Thank you all for coming and being here with us. My name's Ellie. I'm joined by my colleague Leah. We're both engagement officers with the UK MS Register. If you've emailed the register recently, the chances are you'll have spoken with one of us. Before we begin, we've just got a couple of housekeeping points to cover. So first of all, your cameras are off. We can't see or hear you, so you can put yourselves at ease. If you want to ask us questions at any point, you can do so using the Q&A button. We'll cover questions at the end once the presentations are finished. Just be aware we can only answer general questions relating to the presentations. We can't give out any personalised medical advice. Finally, we're recording the webinar and we'll be sharing on our YouTube channel. So if you know anyone who might be interested in this as you're listening along, you can watch it back once we make the recording available. So I'm just going to introduce our two speakers this evening. We are joined by Imogen Collier and Alexandra Moura. Thank you both for being here. First, we're going to hear from Imi. Imi is a PhD researcher at Queen Mary University of London. She recently worked with the Register, hosting a questionnaire on menopause and MS. Some of you have answered this questionnaire, so this may be familiar. Imi is going to share details of how the questionnaire came about and what she's planning to do with the results.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So I'm Imi, I'm a PhD student at the Centre for Preventive Neurology at Queen Mary University of London, and I'm researching the impact and experience of menopause for people with MS. Today I'm going to give a little bit of background about menopause and about why we want to research menopause and MS, tell you a little bit about what we do and don't know about it at the moment. And then I'll talk about a current study with the MS Register, so tell you what we're trying to find out in that study, how we designed the study, and some very early sort of brief results. Some of the things that we've learned that we could improve on for next time, and finally a little bit about the next steps and the impact that we're hoping to have with this work. So this is sort of the most commonly used staging system for female reproductive aging, and it divides women's adult lives up into 3 stages. The first is reproductive or pre-menopause. The second is menopausal transition or perimenopause, sometimes used interchangeably. And the last is post-menopause. And the reproductive phase is from your first ever period through all the years when you're having regular menstrual periods. I know not everyone's irregular, but then the menopausal transition starts when people start to notice changes to the flow or to the regularity of their periods, and they might start to experience some menopause symptoms at this time too. The most common menopause symptoms are things like hot flushes and night sweats, but symptoms can also include things like sleep problems, problems with memory and cognition, bladder problems, and anxiety and depression are really common as well. And there's a lot of other things. Menopause itself is actually one single day. So that second orange oval on the screen at the moment, it's the day of your last ever period. And this can only ever be sort of retrospectively diagnosed 12 months after it's happened. So you can only know it was your last period when you've had 12 months with no periods. And after that last ever period, you're considered post-menopausal. So you won't have periods anymore. And actually the first few years of that post-menopausal phase are when it's most likely that you will experience menopause symptoms. Perimenopause, so that transition phase can last for several years, and it can be really different for everyone how long that lasts. The average age that people have their last period in the UK is 51. For most people, it's somewhere between 45 and 55, but it can happen earlier or later than that as well. And this is not sort of scientifically accurate, but it's a bit more of an artist's impression of the hormonal fluctuations and changes that are going on during that time. So hormones are chemical messages, and 2 of the hormones that are sort of doing things during menopause are estrogen and progesterone. And you can see here that their levels change in a kind of regular, predictable way during the reproductive phase. And then we see irregular, unpredictable and kind of dramatic fluctuations during that menopausal transition and the early post-menopause as well. And the levels sort of tail off in menopause. So this is just to illustrate that things go a little bit unpredictable and irregular with hormones during that menopausal transition. So why are we interested in researching menopause and MS? Well, the first reason is just that menopause will affect a huge number of people with MS. So we know that around 71% of people with MS in the UK are women, And because most women with MS are diagnosed between the ages of 20 and 40, and the average age of menopause is between 45 and 55, as we've just seen, that means that most women with MS will go through menopause while living with MS. And we know that hormonal changes during other times of life can impact MS. So, for example, in pregnancy, people are less likely to have relapses, but maybe more likely to have relapses during the postpartum period. So there's reason to think that maybe the hormonal changes around menopause could have an impact on MS too. However, from the research so far that we have on MS and menopause, it's still really unclear whether menopause negatively impacts MS symptoms, disability level, and disease course. It's unclear whether hormonal replacement therapy, or HRT, which is a common treatment for menopause symptoms, can improve symptoms for people with MS, or even whether HRT could help to protect against MS-related neurological damage. We still really don't know the answers to these things. And the reason, or some of the reasons that we don't know that these things are really unclear still, are that previous studies have had very few participants, and we need big studies with lots of people in order to be confident about our findings. Lots of the studies haven't looked at MS change over time, so before, during, and after menopause, which is really important. And the results of the studies we have so far are really conflicting as well. So some say that menopause looks like it does impact MS, and some say that it doesn't. Really importantly, there's just still not enough research, so we do need a lot more studies. Personally, I think MS and menopause has been neglected as a topic for researchers, but another reason for there being so little research might be that it's actually quite a complex and challenging thing to research, and there are several reasons for that. So firstly, there are loads of overlapping symptoms between MS and menopause, particularly things like fatigue, brain fog, mood, and sleep problems can be caused by either, and it can be basically impossible to tell which is which. It's also really hard to tease apart any impact of menopause from the impact of aging, because in a lot of people with MS, they tend to experience a worsening of MS in their 50s. It's really difficult to tell if menopause is having sort of an effect separate to or over and above the effect of aging around that time. And also menopause staging is vague, and people's experience doesn't always match up exactly to that staging criteria that clinicians and researchers use that we saw on the first few slides. The other thing is that I know we often hear that one person's MS can look very different to someone else's, and the same is true of menopause. So one person's menopause will look very different to the next person's. So it's really, really difficult to kind of smooth out all of that variation and identify any patterns that tell us what's going on when it could be just so different between one person and the next. And finally, sort of the other problems that most studies have is that they've only really looked at things like MRI scans, lab tests, or questionnaires that were filled out by doctors. So the perspectives of people with MS is really, really missing from the research we have so far. And the previous studies have only really looked at impact of menopause in terms of impact on things like MS symptoms, disability, and disease course. So things like possible impact on areas like fatigue or mood or quality of life just, haven't been studied in detail at all, really. But this is where our study comes in, and this is why we wanted to work with the MS Register to do it. So as you'll know, the MS Register has a huge number of participants, which gives us the opportunity to do a really big study, which is what we need to do. They collect information directly from people with MS via what they call patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMs. So that gives us the opportunity to look at the perspectives of people with MS rather than, scans or lab tests. Some of these patient-reported outcome measures cover things like fatigue and mood and quality of life, which we'd said hadn't really been looked at in MS and menopause so far. And the UK MS Register ask their participants to complete the questionnaires every 6 months, which means we can see how things are changing over time for them and try to find patterns and links between things. So these are all really important things that sort of the MS Register makes possible, and makes it a really brilliant opportunity to look at MS and menopause. So what we did was design a questionnaire about menopause and MS, asked the MS Register to send it out to their female participants, and we're now sort of at step 3 here. in the middle of analysing all the answers that people gave to that questionnaire. But I'll talk a little bit about the questionnaire and how we designed it before we get on to any results. So our menopause questionnaire asks people about the dates that they went through menopause and perimenopause, the symptoms that they had and how severe they felt they were. HRT, so again, sort of dates, types of HRT that people have tried, how beneficial they found it, any other things that they might have done to try to manage menopause symptoms, like diet or exercise or massage, or it's a huge list of things, whatever they tried, we kind of wanted to know about that and to know about what people are finding helpful. The places that people have looked for information and advice about menopause and where has been most helpful for them. And finally, about the interactions that they've had with health professionals around menopause and how that's gone and how helpful they've been. We worked with a patient and public involvement group to design and develop the questionnaire. So this was a group of women with MS from all across the UK who were either going through menopause at the time or had already been through it. And the first thing we did with them was we had a focus group where we discussed the areas of people's lives that they felt had been most impacted by menopause. And then this kind of informed what we're looking at in the MS Registers data. So when we're looking at things that might have changed with people's MS before, during and after menopause, we're including those things like fatigue. I think sleep was mentioned a lot, and mood, because our PPI group told us that those were things that were really important and they felt had been really impacted for them. And then we also did some exercises to see the level of detail that the PPI group thought participants would be able to give us in terms of things like the date that they first noticed menopause symptoms. You know, could people give the day, the month, and the year, or maybe just maybe a year? I think we asked in the end within a year if people could, or within an age bracket, if people could give us that. And the kind of level of detail about HRT they've taken as well. And this was really, really helpful in designing the actual questions in the questionnaire and the wording used. And then after those focus groups, we worked with a smaller number of our PPI members who took part in sort of walkthroughs or read-throughs of the whole questionnaire. So we sat together in kind of online and had read through the entire draft, talked the whole thing through, identified any problems, for example, like where questions maybe didn't make sense or needed rewording, or maybe there was not a multiple choice answer that fit with that person's situation. We could try to sort of come up with solutions together. And then once we had a digital online version of the questionnaire, our PPI members piloted that for us as well, which was super helpful to give it that final check. So once the questionnaire was ready, it was made available to MS Register participants between, I think it was sort of mid-November 24 and early mid-January 25. So we had quite a good window to give people time to complete it. And we now have all of our responses from the questionnaire. There are 3 main questions that we're hoping to answer with the information that people have provided. So I'll just go through those now. This is what we're really trying to find out. The first question is, does MS get worse faster after menopause? So because we know that MS is a progressive disease and things do typically get worse over time, even if it's over a long period of time, what we want to do here is to compare how fast things were getting worse before menopause with how fast they're getting worse after menopause. And if there is a difference, we want to check whether that change in how fast things are getting worse really does happen at menopause, or is it maybe a few years earlier, a few years later? That's the first question. The second question is, does the severity of someone's menopause symptoms impact the severity of their MS symptoms during menopause? So here we want to compare a group of people who've reported that they had really bad menopause symptoms with a group who had minimal or maybe even no menopause symptoms at all. And we want to look at what was going on with their MS during that time and see if the people who had worse menopause symptoms were also reporting worse MS symptoms during that period. And the third question is sort of a combination of the first two. So it's, does the severity of someone's menopause symptoms impact how fast their MS symptoms get worse after menopause? So again, here we want to compare people who had bad menopause symptoms with people who didn't have so bad menopause symptoms and see if how bad your menopause symptoms are has a knock-on effect in terms of how fast your MS gets worse later on. As I said, we're still doing the analysis, so we don't have the answer to those big three questions just yet, but I can tell you a little about some of the information from the questionnaires. So we had over 3,000 responses to the questionnaire, which is just brilliant. And our participants there was a huge range in ages of people who took part, so between 21 and 90 years old, with an average age of about 55 and a half. About 60% of our participants had relapsing remitting MS at the time that they took part, 26% had secondary progressive MS, and 9% had primary progressive MS. Most of our participants were postmenopausal, which I think we expected, but 17% were perimenopausal and 14% were premenopausal, so still in that reproductive phase on that scale that we saw at the start, which is really important because we need those groups to be able to compare them to the postmenopausal group. So thank you to everyone who is kind of a bit younger, hadn't started to think about menopause yet and still took part. I really appreciate that. The average age that people reported entering perimenopause, so when they first noticed changes to their periods or first noticed menopause symptoms, was 46. And the average age that people reported having their last ever period was about 49 and a half. Almost all of the perimenopausal participants reported experiencing menopause symptoms, and about 3/4 of the postmenopausal participants reported symptoms as well. This question just meant, have you ever experienced them rather than are you experiencing them now? So we had a huge, I think that's why the percentage is so high. And the most commonly reported symptoms were hot flushes, night sweats, and sleep problems, which I think matches people without MS reporting those symptoms as well. And nearly half of our perimenopausal and 1/4 of our postmenopausal participants reported noticing changes in their MS symptoms that they thought might be related to menopause. The most common of those probably won't be any surprise to anybody here, but were fatigue, cognitive difficulties, and bladder problems. So that's things that they thought were going on with their MS that they felt had been impacted by their menopause. And what have we learned for next time? So we were really pleased with the number of people who took part. So a huge thank you again to everybody who did. We think that the work that our PPI group did to help us improve the questionnaire was really, really valuable and made a huge difference, and has meant that we've got good quality information back and good quality information to analyse. But I think the perfect questionnaire probably doesn't exist. And I have noticed a couple of questions that I think maybe weren't understood in the way that we'd intended them to be due to our poor wording. So I'll just show you a couple of those. So for example, we had asked people to select the different types of health professionals that they'd had conversations with menopause about. And then if they said that they'd raised the topic themselves rather than the health professional having raised the topic, we asked them, why did you discuss with this person in particular? And what we were trying to get at there was, why did you go to this person rather than anyone else? And we were expecting answers like, they're really approachable, or they're the health professional that I see most often, or they felt like the most appropriate person to go to about this. And we did get a lot of answers like that, but we also got a chunk of answers where people had said things like menopause or HRT. So they'd given the reason that they sought help, but not the reason they went to that person in particular, which is a completely legitimate answer to the question in the way we've worded it. And I think our fault for not making the question clearer. I think probably what's happened there is myself and the PPI group, having worked on this for so long, and maybe started thinking in the same way, and it might have been helpful to have this questionnaire checked by someone who hasn't been thinking about menopause and MS for months or ever, to just get their kind of understanding of how the questions read as well. And a second one that we think probably we could improve in future. Here we asked people, I think we asked all participants for their opinion on who should receive training on MS and menopause. And we got quite a few responses from people saying things like they didn't feel qualified to give an answer. So maybe we should have made clearer that the question is just about an opinion, or perhaps worded it differently and said something like, as a person with MS who has gone through or will go through menopause in the future, because all of our participants will either have gone through menopause, be going through it, or go through it in the future, who would you like to be informed and trained on MS and menopause? Who's kind of the most appropriate person, in your opinion? But overall, I think the questions seem to have been understood in the way that we intended them to be. So our PPI group did a great job. And just a quick word about the next steps. We're hoping to have the full results in the next couple of months, and we'll try to share those and publish those so that other researchers and clinicians can benefit from understanding a bit about the impact of menopause from the perspective of people with MS. And we're also planning to work with the PPI group to develop some kind of tool that will have a direct impact for people with MS. So this could be, for example, guidelines for neurologists, it could be GP training, it could be something to help people with MS start the conversation about menopause with their MS team. But we'll work with the PPI group to decide what the most helpful thing would be and kind of what our results lend themselves towards as well when we have all of those. And that's everything from me. Thank you for listening. I'll stop sharing so I can see you all again.
That's great. Thank you so much, Imi. It's really interesting to learn more about the process of developing the questionnaire, and it's brilliant to hear that you had such a positive response. Thank you to those that have been responding to the Q&A. We've got some questions coming in. We'll get through as many of those as we can with Imi at the end. But just to reiterate to people, maybe who have joined a little bit later on, there's a Q&A at the bottom. Please feel free, add some questions as we go along for Imi and for Alex, who will be speaking next. But thank you, Imi.
Yeah, so just to introduce Alex then, Alex is a PhD researcher at Imperial College London. She and her team are currently running the LION study, which is investigating the family risk of MS by recruiting first and second degree relatives of people living with MS. The register are helping with the recruitment of this study, so you may have seen emails from us relating to this. So it's over to you, Alex, if you want to tell us a bit more about the study.
Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come hear me speak about this project. So Ellie already introduced me, but so I'm Alexandra Moura. I'm a PhD student at Imperial College London in my second year of my PhD. And I'm working very closely with my primary supervisor, who is Dr. Richard Nicholas, and he's a MS neurologist, but he's also the clinical lead at the UK MS Register. And so together we want to, and we are launching this project, which is looking at doing a deep dive into MS families. And for this project, we're collaborating with the UK MS Register. So first, I'm going to give a little bit of background about why we decided to do this project and why we think this project is important in the field of MS. So firstly, the exact cause of MS is still unknown. What we do know is that MS is caused by a combination of genetic risk factors and environmental risk factors as well. So on the genetic side, we do know that there are genetic risk factors for MS, and we also know that many families have more than one occurrence of MS. So research has actually shown that 1 in 8 patients usually have a family history of MS. What we also know is that in the general population, there's a 1 in 700 risk of having MS, but this risk is increased for first and second degree relatives of people with MS. So it's usually increased by 1.5 to 2.7%. However, recently, looking at the numbers within the UK MS Register, it has been shown that it can be increased even higher. So it could be up to 9% of an increase for first degree relatives. So these 2 points show us that actually looking into families that have MS could be really interesting, but this hasn't yet been done in research because screening family members of people with MS is quite complicated. Having people, healthy people coming in for in-person assessments would be quite time-consuming and impractical. So it hasn't really yet been done, and this is something that we wanted to look at. The final point which prompted the study is that currently MS patients are being started on treatment really late. So they're usually being started on treatments maybe 5 to 10 years after some brain changes have already started to occur. So I'm going to walk you through kind of how MS comes about on this graph. So if you look at the start during the at-risk period, you have a combination of genetic and environmental risk factors, which will essentially trigger MS. And that's the first red arrow. So that's when you have your disease initiation. And after, you have this period, which is called the prodromal phase, which will last about 5 to 10 years in between the two red arrows, where you don't have any visible symptoms yet, but you have some symptoms that will still be happening, but more internally. So you might have some brain changes occurring. You have other symptoms like depression, maybe low cognitive function, insomnia, pain, headaches. But none of these will really prompt someone necessarily to go see a neurologist specifically for MS. It's only when these brain changes trigger something like, for example, a tremor or something that's more visible, that at that point, someone who might be having MS already will be prompted to go see a neurologist. And it's only at this stage that someone will be diagnosed with MS. So this can be 5 to 10 years already down the line into the process of the disorder. And so what we wanted to do is we would essentially like to try and diagnose it earlier by catching people in this prodromal phase. So in this phase when the visible symptoms haven't started occurring yet, but MS has already been triggered and is already making changes in the brain itself. And so this is what prompted the LION study. So the LION study, Likelihood of Neurodegeneration Research Study, the main aim of the study is to investigate first-degree relatives of MS patients to try and identify very early features of MS that would be in this prodromal phase. So we do know as well that this is a very sensitive topic. So when we were kind of putting the study together, we did go to a PPI group, so a group of people with MS, to kind of see how they feel about the study and whether they think it's a positive thing. And we actually had very positive feedback from the PPI group. The overall sentiment was good, but they did also raise some obvious concerns about the sensitivity of the study itself. And we did take all of this into account when we designed the study. So, for example, initially we were going to send a lot of emails to a lot of people in one big batch, but we decided to work around it in a different way. And actually, we're going in small increments, so reaching out to people in smaller batches so that we can appropriately manage everyone. And anyone who has any questions can always come back to us, and we're here to respond to everyone as well. So I'm going to run you through the different steps of the study. So the first step is that we're collaborating with the UK MS Register to reach out to people with MS. So essentially the UK MS Register is sending out emails to everyone on the register, as I said, in small batches. So we started with only 200 people, and you might have seen this email come through already, or you might not. And the email is basically asking everyone if they are comfortable speaking to their relatives about the study. The second step is that if the relative is happy to do the study, they are given a link within the initial email, and they click on the link, which brings them to an online platform where they can complete the first phase of the study. So the first phase of the study has two specific tasks for them. So the first one is to complete a set of online questionnaires. So the online questionnaires have different questions on demographics, lifestyle, medical history, family history, etc. But we also have two specific questionnaires that ask about motor function and psychiatric function specifically. And these questionnaires have been previously validated and tested in a population of people with MS and in the general population. And we saw that by looking at the results from these questionnaires, we could actually identify people with MS from the general population. So the second step on this online platform is to do the cognitive tests. So the cognitive tests, all done online. There's 14 cognitive tests looking at things like memory and attention, how they process information as well. And again, these cognitive tests were previously validated and tested in a population of people with MS compared to the general population. And we found that, again, by looking at the results from the cognitive tests, we could identify people with MS from the general population. So both these methods are sensitive and specific to picking up MS features, essentially. So we would have the participants, the relatives, doing these two questionnaires and cognitive tests online, and we would then look at the results. And the second phase, so step 3 of the study, is that any participants who have abnormal results, so any results that actually differ from the general population and resemble more an MS profile, they would be asked to come in person and they would do some further assessments. So they would do an MRI scan, and a blood test. And these are two tests that are much more specific as well for MS. And we might find some brain changes. We might find a blood marker specific to MS in this case. And this brings me to my step 4, which is a very crucial one, that if we do find anything abnormal on the MRI scan, the participant would be directly contacted, and we would give them further management. We could give them an NHS referral as well, which is why my supervisor is on the project as well, and he's a neurologist, and he can properly manage anyone who might have any abnormal results during the study. So just to finish, where are we now? So as I mentioned, we launched in January actually, and we've started sending out some emails in small increments. And we've currently had around 75 people responding to the questionnaires and the cognitive tests, and we've kind of started looking at the data. But we do want to increase the study more as well. And this is kind of why we wanted to speak to everyone at this webinar as well. So we wanted to see the best way of approaching people, because as I said, currently we're sending emails to people with MS and asking them to reach out to their relatives. So we're kind of going through 2 different means, whereas perhaps it might be better to directly reach out to relatives. So for example, just sending out an email to the general population and asking them if they have a relative with MS, and if they do, then if they would want to do the study. So kind of leaving the option open to relatives directly, rather than going through people with MS and asking them to have perhaps those difficult conversations. And so on that note, we wanted to share a poll with everyone and ask you if you'd be happy to respond to 2 questions, which is basically asking how you feel about the study and whether you would feel comfortable having these discussions with your relatives. So I think the poll will come on your screens. So we have 2 questions that we're asking you today. So the first question is, how does this study make you feel? And we're wondering if the study makes you feel positively and you would be prepared to ask your family members to participate. Or second option is, the study makes you feel positively, but you would rather not ask your family members to participate. And the third option is, the study makes you feel negatively and you would not be prepared to ask your family members to participate. And the second question is, please tell us why you would or would not feel comfortable sharing the study with your family.
And just to say at this point as well, if anyone's got comments or feedback on this for Alex that you don't want to put in the poll, you can always put it in the Q&A and we can go through at the end.
Okay, great. Well, it seems that most people feel positively and would want to speak with their relatives about it, which is great. We do have some people who feel positively about the study, but who might not be prepared to ask family members, which is totally understandable. And I think we will probably look at trying to reach out directly to relatives as well, and asking them if they would be interested in taking part just by reaching out to the general population. So that's really helpful. Thank you to everyone for putting those in.
So Leah, I can see we've had some questions coming in during the talk, so that's great. Thank you, Alex, for your talk. That was really good, and hopefully your recruitment will continue to increase on that. And for both you and Imi, I should have said, we will keep updating participants on the results of these studies. So keep your eyes peeled for more information there. Leah, do you want to run us through some questions?
Yes, that's great. First of all, just want to say thank you for all the questions that have been coming in for our speakers, both live this evening, and we've had some emails coming in to us in our contact mailbox, which has been really good, much appreciated. Thank you. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can live tonight. We'll try our best otherwise to get back to everyone by email. If you do have any further questions as we're going through this, again, pop them into the Q&A as we're working through, or as I say, send them via email at contact@ukmsregister.org, and we'll have that all available to you in an email at the end as well. Okay, shall we start with you, Imi, if you're ready to ask for a couple of questions? Okay, so first question we have is, will this study tell us whether HRT helps with MS progression?
No, it won't. So for that, we would need a different type of study design. So ideally, we would have one where people with MS are randomly assigned into two groups. So one that's given HRT and one that isn't given HRT, and people don't know which group they're in. That kind of like randomized control trial. And the reason for that is because in a sort of observational study like this one, where we haven't changed anything, we're just looking at what people reported about their MS. We have people who take HRT and we have people who don't take HRT, but there might be some difference between those two groups that could cause the difference in MS severity that we don't know about, rather than that sort of random assigning to different groups would help to kind of eliminate that. So no, it won't, unfortunately.
Okay. Thanks, Imi. We've got a comment that's come in from Susan on the Q&A on menopause research. It might be interesting to check trends on MS being diagnosed around the same time as perimenopause. It certainly seems a group of us for whom the hormonal changes brought out MS and didn't know we had it previously.
That's something I've heard from a fair number of the people with MS that I've spoken to, either PPI members or we did a qualitative study as well, where I interviewed, I think it was 26 people. So we did like really in-depth interviews about people's personal experiences, and people did mention that. And I think it's one of those really frustrating things about MS and menopause, where there's that overlap and you really don't know what's going on, what symptoms are caused by what, and if they're both sort of starting at the same time, they can potentially mask each other. So yeah, I think it's an important observation by Susan, and we I mean, it would be really great if we could look at, for example, routinely collected data, so people's healthcare records, so we can see when they were diagnosed with MS and when they were, when they went through perimenopause. But unfortunately, still for most people, that the perimenopause bit won't be in their health records. So we can't sort of correlate those two things. It would be great if we could, but yeah, good observation.
That's great. Thanks, Imi, and thanks, Susan, for the question. I've got one more question. Why do you think there has been so little research on MS and menopause before now? And why do you think it's suddenly of interest?
Yeah, I think I mean, in my opinion, I do think that it's like a lot of women's health topics. It has been neglected in the past, and I think there's definitely, I mean, there's unquestionably an element of sort of historical sexism with that, where women's health just hasn't been prioritized. But I also think with menopause that overlaps with ageism, because we've seen research on women's health topics that affect younger women kind of increase before we've seen research that about menopause, and things that typically impact older women. I know people who are younger can have menopause as well, but it's that sort of typical age group. And I think there's an overlap of sexism and ageism, and potentially ableism as well, because as we kind of talked about, menopause happens around the same time that for a lot of people they might transition into progressive MS rather than relapsing remitting MS. And we know sort of historically with MS treatments and things, there's been a lot more available for people who are earlier on in their MS and potentially have less severe disability and less severe MS symptoms. And there's maybe been a bit of neglect for people who have progressive MS as well. So I think there's just all these things going on that have meant it hasn't been prioritized when really it should have. But that is really improving now. Like a lot, the number of people doing research on MS and menopause is increasing, which is really, yeah, it's good.
It's good. That's great. I'm conscious because we're getting more questions coming in, and obviously people want the answers to these. This is going to have an overlap from the last question, but Tracy's just messaged in. Was there any difference between the different types of MS, i.e., did people with SPMS have more or worse symptoms of menopause or not? So an overlap from the last question. But
Yeah, it's a good one, and it's something I hope we can answer, but I'll need a bit more time because I haven't got to that point in the analysis yet. But yeah, really good question. Something we'll look at.
that's lovely. That's great. Okay, thanks so much, Imi. I'm just looking now, Alex. We've just got a few questions for you too. I'm just going to begin with, as I look through, we've had some nice comments coming through for you both, so I'm just conscious to get through these for you. second. We've had Yolanda contact us, Alex, with as a mum with MS and a son with MS. I know quite a few people in a similar position, and I welcome any research, which is long overdue. So appreciation there for your work that you're doing.
That's really nice. I think the more I speak with people from PPI groups and who have MS, it does actually occur so often that someone will say they have another relative with MS, which is why I think, as you say, the research is good to be doing now.
And again, we've got another topic when you're saying, obviously, with family members. We've got one coming in about identical twin sisters. Would identical twins be helpful for the study, whether one's got MS and one doesn't have MS?
Yes, definitely. That was actually one thing that we spoke about as well, because being able to look at one person, one twin that has MS and one that doesn't, and specifically looking at these tests could actually inform us a lot as well. So identical twins would be really, really helpful as well in the study.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, that's great. 1 second. Okay. Conscious to get through everyone's questions for you. Okay, we've got a question that's come in from George. Has any previous familial studies or this one seen a link between different neurological conditions? For example, I have MS and my brother has Parkinson's.
Interesting. I'm actually not sure about that. Not that I have read or know of off the top of my head. No, I'm not sure about that one, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's fine. And we can get back to people with any information later or signpost anybody anyway. So rest assured we'll get some information across. Okay. You have so many coming in, so we're really thankful for all these questions to work through. Right. So, Alex, how many people do you have to screen to reach your target number? This is one that's come in via email.
So in the beginning, when we first kind of started putting the study together, based on the literature, it does say that the risk is about 1.5 to 2.7%. So given that number, we would have had to screen about, let's say, 10,000 people to get 200 people from that number that might have some abnormal results and that could give us more information. But after actually speaking with PPI groups, we saw that, we don't know what we're going to find. It could be that we get 200 people and 200 people actually do have some sort of abnormal results. So we kind of decided to do it a different way. And we're going in these small increments of people and seeing as we go what we're going to find. So we started with 200. We're going to do another 200 batch, and we're analyzing those results first, seeing the abnormal results in those batches, and then we're kind of going from there. But we do have scope to look at 200 people's MRI scans within this project. So we're kind of going more incrementing our numbers. And once we reach the 200, we'll kind of stop there because we don't want to go too high and have lots of abnormal results and not be able to manage people. And I think one really important thing about the study is to be able to communicate with people and manage people within the study because of the sensitivity around it. So we're kind of trying to reach 200, but not necessarily starting with a number to get the 200, but rather incrementing as we go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Alex. Another question via email. If a person goes through this process and they're told that they would potentially have MS, is there any support available to them within the trial?
So within the trial, we do have Richard Nicholas, the doctor, the neurologist, who is working very closely with me on this, and he would be able to appropriately manage anyone who does have any abnormal results, as he is an MS neurologist that works with people every day who have MS. But on top of that, there's always other sources outside of the trial as well for anyone. So for example, the MS Society helpline could give also some further information to anyone. But within the trial, we would have the neurologist who would appropriately manage anyone who needs it.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think it's important as well to mention here that support's always available via the MS Society. We've got the helpline number available and there's an email address, but they're great just to reach out to for all support networks. So it's always worth bearing in mind that's available to you as well. Thank you so much, Alex. I do have another question that's come in from Elaine, who's saying that she has MS and she's one of 6 children, and all of the siblings have had an autoimmune disease, Crohn's, psoriasis, another with MS. Are you looking into the connections with other diseases?
So I think this is quite similar to the last question we had. We're not looking at the connection with other diseases for the time being because it's already such a large study on its own. It could be something that could be done further down the line, definitely. It's actually really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that different autoimmune disorders are in the same family, but yeah, not within this study, but it could be interesting for the future.
Oh, that's great. I'll just have a quick look if we've had any more coming in.
There's one more there, Leah, from an anonymous person. I think this one must be for Imi. It says, do you think it would be a good idea to have neurologists trained on menopause, given the high number of women that are diagnosed with MS?
I mean, personally, yes, I do. I think that if there's any chance that menopause impacts MS, it's really important that neurologists are trained on absolutely everything that could be going on for their patients. And, we know that more than half of their patients will be women. So all of those sort of women's health things, all of those hormone related things, we talked about pregnancy and the postpartum period as well, should be something that neurologists know about so that they can help to prepare patients for that period of time and what might happen, even if nothing does happen drastically. And also to just be aware that maybe managing the menopause symptoms might improve quality of life for their patients. So even if there's something going on with menopause and it isn't related to MS, people might be kind of turning up to clinics with what they think are an exacerbation of their MS symptoms, but actually the fatigue might be menopause or it might be something else. So for neurologists to just even think, oh, the time of life this person's at, it could be menopause. Maybe we look at HRT or treating what could be menopause symptoms to try to help with that, and that could really improve someone's quality of life. So yeah, just to even have the thought would be really good.
Lovely, that's great. Thank you so much, Imi. And I think that does, for the time being, draw our Q&A to an end. As I say, we will be getting back to any questions we haven't covered via email. And also you can send some emails into us, some questions into us via email. And we'll get back to you over the next few days. Even if it's a question that comes to mind in a few days' time, then please do contact us and we'll try our best to get back to you as soon as we can.
Yeah, so just very quickly before we bring things to a close, if I can just launch a very quick feedback poll, hopefully you can all see that. Just a single question. We just want to know, did this webinar meet your expectations? Hopefully it did. If you've got any more detailed feedback that you do want to send over, we will send out a feedback form soon. And if you want to drop us an email with anything, then you can do so of course as well. So hopefully you can see that now. We've got the Lion Study website. If anyone's interested in learning more about that, head over there. We've got our contact email address if anyone wants to drop Leah or I any questions, either for the register or if you want to ask Imi or Alex any questions, we can pass those on, no problem at all. As Leah has said, we'll send out further information about both the studies in a few days' time, along with the feedback form, so more information is coming. So all that's left for me to say now is thank you so much to both Alex and Amy for presenting tonight. Really, really interesting presentations. And I think it's really nice, people who've received emails about these studies to be able to put a face to the study and to learn a bit more about it from you directly. So we're really grateful for that. Thank you. And thank you very much to everyone who came along tonight and shared their last hour with us. I hope to see you at future webinars. If you've got any ideas for any topics you'd like to see us cover in future webinars, just send it over. We'd be happy to hear your feedback. So thanks a lot, everyone, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.